The Alpha King, Valen, had ruled for years with iron resolve, but nothing had prepared him for the impossible truth. His son, Luca, the pup who rejected every woman in his life, had just called a stranger, Mom, and in that moment everything changed. Before we continue, please, click subscribe, like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're listening from. The throne room was as cold as the heart of the Alpha King. Valen sat upon his obsidian throne, his fingers twitching as they gripped the armrest, eyes fixed on the stormy night outside the castle's high windows. The wind howled, and the moonlight pierced through the clouds, casting an eerie glow on the stone walls. It should have been a majestic sight, his kingdom, his legacy, but all Valen could focus on was the weight of the crown pressing down on his brow, and the insufferable sound of his son's voice ringing in his ears. "Why won't you listen to me, Luca?" he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. His son, barely 5 years old, had driven him to the brink of madness. He was nothing like the child Valen had hoped for, the heir who would one day lead the pack with strength and wisdom. Luca had grown up under the watchful eyes of the kingdom, yet there was no love in his heart for his people. Worse, there was no love for any woman brought into his life. Every Omega, every gentle-hearted woman who had tried to care for him had been met with rejection so violent that they fled in terror. Valen's broad shoulders sagged with exhaustion. How had it come to this? He had been the Alpha King for so long, ruling with a firm hand and a steady heart. But now his strength seemed to be slipping away, his very bloodline threatened by his son's inexplicable hatred for every woman who entered their lives. Valen had tried everything. He had called upon powerful Omegas from across the realm, gifted healers, and compassionate mothers. None of them had worked. None of them had managed to soften the storm that raged in Luca's heart. The problem, Valen had begun to think, was deeper than mere rejection. It was a curse. Valen, his queen, Alara, said softly, her voice almost a whisper against the cold silence. She stood by his side, her violet cloak trailing across the floor like a ghost. Her expression was one of quiet concern, yet there was also a weariness that spoke volumes. She had been patient with Luca for years, but even her strength was beginning to fray at the edges. "You must do something," Alara said, the flicker of her voice betraying the exhaustion she hid so well. "Luca needs a mother, and you need someone who can help you raise him." Valen closed his eyes for a moment, rubbing the back of his neck as the weight of her words sank in. His queen had been nothing but supportive. Together, they had fought wars, led their people, and built a kingdom that should have stood the test of time. Yet, nothing, no amount of power, no number of allies had prepared them for Luca's curse. "I've tried everything," Valen replied hoarsely, slumping further into the throne. "No one can reach him. He hates every woman I bring near him. It's as if—" He trailed off, his voice breaking with frustration, "as if he's cursed." Alara's brow furrowed as she stepped closer, her boots clicking on the cold stone floor. "It's not a curse, Valen," she said, her tone gentle yet firm. "It's a wound, and wounds can heal. But you have to find the right way." Her words rang true, but they did little to ease the gnawing anxiety inside him. He had once been a man of action, someone who solved problems with brute strength and swift decisions, but this was something he couldn't fight. No army, no warrior, could defeat the invisible wall that Luca had built between himself and every woman. Suddenly, the silence of the room was broken by a sharp cry. Luca's voice, high-pitched and filled with rage. "I don't want any of them!" Luca screamed from the hallway, his voice carrying through the stone walls. "I'll never call them mother. Never." Valen's eyes snapped open, and he was already on his feet. His heart raced in his chest. Luca's tantrums had become worse over the past few weeks. The boy's defiance was becoming more violent, his outbursts fiercer. It was clear now. Luca wasn't simply rejecting the women Valen brought to him, he was rejecting the world. A world that had promised him power, security, and safety, yet had failed him at every turn. Alara's face grew pale as she turned toward the door, already anticipating the chaos. "I'll go to him," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "No," Valen snapped, his gaze hardening. "I'll go." He stormed out of the throne room, the cold wind biting at his face as he made his way toward the sound of Luca's cries. As he entered the child's chambers, his heart clenched at the sight of Luca, tears streaking down his face, fists clenched, eyes wild. "I hate them! I hate them all!" Luca screamed, kicking at the air in frustration. Valen's chest tightened. He had never seen his son so broken, so lost. The wolf in Luca had always been powerful, untamable. But this was a grief Valen couldn't fix with strength alone. "Luca," Valen said softly, kneeling beside the boy, his voice calm, though his heart hammered in his chest. "I understand you're angry, but there has to be a way for us to heal, together." Luca's gaze flickered to him, his face twisted in rage. "You don't understand," he spat. "None of them ever stayed. None of them cared. They just left me." Valen swallowed hard. It was true. None of the women had lasted. None had withstood Luca's wrath long enough to help him heal. And as much as Valen wished to comfort his son, he knew that the anger was something far deeper than simple rejection. Luca's fury was a primal force, one that had no place for mercy. But there was one thing Valen hadn't told his son. The women hadn't left because they didn't care, they had left because Luca's hatred had driven them away. There was something darker at play. Something ancient and unspoken. Valen placed a hand on Luca's trembling shoulder, the only place where the boy had allowed him to touch him in weeks. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "We'll find a way through this, I promise." But Luca shook his head violently, pushing him away. "I don't need your promises. I need my mom." Valen froze, his heart skipping a beat. "Mom." The word struck like lightning, reverberating through his bones. It wasn't just an utterance. It was a call, something deep and instinctive. As Luca's eyes bore into his, Valen realized that he had been blind all along. The truth had always been there, lurking in the shadows. His son wasn't just angry, he was searching for something. A mother. A bond. A bond that neither he nor Veloura could fulfill. And that realization would change everything. The next day, the air in the castle felt heavy with the unspoken tension of the night before. The words Luca had spoken, his desperate cry for a mom, replayed in Valen's mind over and over again. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something that neither he nor Veloura could have anticipated. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the courtyard, a new arrival made her way into the castle. Eliana. The Omega's presence was a quiet one, almost imperceptible at first, like the calm before a storm. She was small, her features delicate yet defined, and her dark eyes held an unfamiliar depth. There was a serenity about her that contrasted sharply with the chaos that had consumed the castle. Valen stood at the grand entrance, his arms crossed, watching as Eliana approached. His heart still ached from the previous night's revelation, but he was determined not to let his vulnerability show. His kingdom depended on his strength, his ability to rule. But Luca had cracked open something that Valen hadn't been prepared to face. "Welcome to the castle, Eliana." Valen greeted her, his voice steady but guarded. He didn't know what to make of her, but something about the way she carried herself intrigued him. She wasn't like the others, those women who had been brought to soothe his son's raging heart. Eliana exuded a quiet power, as though she carried a secret beneath her calm exterior. "Thank you, my lord," Eliana responded, her voice soft but firm. Her gaze, though gentle, seemed to see through him in a way that unsettled him. "I've heard much about the kingdom, but I am here to help Luca." There was no hesitation in her words, no sign of fear or uncertainty. Luca was the reason she had come. She wasn't here for glory, riches, or power. Her focus was solely on him. Valen could feel the strange pull of her calmness. For a moment, he considered the possibility that Eliana might be the one who could finally break through Luca's walls. "Have you had experience with children?" Valen asked, though the question felt inadequate as soon as it left his lips. Eliana was an Omega, capable of nurturing, but Luca was no ordinary child. He was an heir to an ancient bloodline, a force that could shake the very foundations of the kingdom. Eliana smiled softly, but there was a flicker of something deeper in her eyes. "I've had my share of experiences with those who are difficult to love," she said quietly, her voice holding an edge of something Valen couldn't quite place. And as she turned to follow him through the castle halls, Valen couldn't shake the feeling that Eliana might be the key to unlocking Luca's heart, but unlocking it would come at a price. Eliana settled into the castle with ease, though there was an air of mystery about her that Valen couldn't quite decipher. She seemed to blend into the background, moving with quiet grace as she navigated the halls. She never asked for attention, yet there was an undeniable aura about her, something that quietly commanded the space around her. Luca, for the first time in weeks, had stopped his tantrums. His outbursts had dwindled, and his reactions, though still cautious, were no longer laced with pure venom. But there was something in the way Luca watched Eliana, something that Valen couldn't ignore. For the first time, Luca didn't push her away. Valen noticed it during dinner one evening, when Luca had eaten more than he had in days, his eyes fixed on Eliana as she sat at the far end of the table. She ate modestly, speaking only when spoken to, but her quiet presence seemed to soothe Luca in a way no one else had managed. He no longer looked at her with distrust or disdain. Instead, there was an unspoken bond between them, one that neither Valen nor anyone else could understand. After the meal, Valen found himself walking with Eliana in the castle's garden, the moonlight casting a soft glow over the sprawling, manicured landscape. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming flowers, and the faint rustle of leaves whispered in the wind. "He's responding to you," Valen said, his voice low as he glanced at Eliana. "But I don't understand it. He's never allowed anyone close before." Eliana paused, her gaze drawn to the full moon above them, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "I didn't expect him to," she said quietly, "but I think there's something between us. Something deep." She hesitated, then added, "I didn't intend for this to happen. I only wanted to help him. But it seems Luca recognizes something in me, something you don't." Valen stiffened at her words. "What do you mean?" Eliana looked at him, her dark eyes serious now. "I believe Luca knows who I truly am, and the bond we share goes beyond what you think." The words hung in the air between them, unspoken, heavy with meaning. Valen's heart skipped a beat, and for the first time, he realized there was far more to Eliana than just a caretaker. There was a connection that ran deeper than blood, something ancient. The next few days passed in a strange haze for Valen. His kingdom, usually demanding his constant attention, felt distant, as though it was no longer his first priority. Every moment he spent watching Eliana interact with Luca left him unsettled, his mind clouded with questions that had no answers. Luca's transformation was subtle at first. The child, who had once resisted every form of affection, had begun to follow Eliana around the castle, quietly observing her movements. He never let her out of his sight, and though he still had the sharp, defensive edge of a wild wolf, there was something new, a gentleness he reserved only for her. Luca even began calling her by her name, rather than dismissing her with the usual fury. It was the first sign of progress in months, but Valen was still uneasy. He could sense that Eliana was holding something back, something she wasn't sharing. Every time she spoke of Luca, there was a fleeting shadow in her gaze, a hesitation in her words. Valen didn't trust this feeling. He needed answers. One evening, after Luca had gone to bed, Valen found himself once again walking the castle's moonlit gardens, seeking clarity. The cool night air stung his skin as he turned a corner and saw Eliana standing alone, gazing up at the stars. She seemed so far removed from the world around her, her posture relaxed but alert, as if she were waiting for something. "Eliana," Valen called out softly, his voice breaking the silence of the night. She turned to face him, a quiet smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Is something troubling you, my lord?" she asked, her voice calm, though there was an underlying tension in it that Valen could feel. "I need to understand," he said, stepping closer. "Why is Luca drawn to you in a way he's never been to anyone else? I can feel the connection between you, but I don't know what it means." Eliana's smile faded as she exhaled slowly, her gaze falling to the ground. She seemed to wrestle with her words before finally speaking. "Because Valen, I am more than just a caretaker. Luca isn't just your son. He is mine too." The weight of her words hit Valen like a physical blow. His mind raced, struggling to process what she had just said. "My son?" Valen whispered. "How could that be?" Eliana's eyes met his, her expression grave. "I was once your mate, before everything fell apart. Luca is our child." The truth, so simple and so impossible, crashed over him like a tidal wave. Valen stood frozen in the garden, his mind reeling from Eliana's revelation. The words, "our child," echoed in his ears, repeating over and over until they became the only sound in his world. He felt as though the ground had been ripped out from beneath him, leaving him suspended in disbelief. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. The air around him seemed thick, as if the very night itself was holding its breath. Eliana stood before him, her gaze steady, but her posture was one of vulnerability. "How can that be possible?" Valen finally whispered, his voice strained. You were never here. You vanished. Luca's mother," he faltered, his throat tightening. "She died giving birth to him." Eliana's eyes softened, her expression pained as she took a slow step toward him. "I never died, Valen. I was taken from you, separated from Luca, and forced into exile. You thought I had abandoned you, but I had no choice. I couldn't protect myself, let alone our child." Valen's chest tightened. The more she spoke, the deeper his confusion grew. He had spent years mourning the loss of the woman he had loved, the woman he believed to be the mother of his child. But now, hearing Eliana's words, the carefully constructed walls of his reality began to crumble. "Why didn't you come back? Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Valen asked, his voice rising in a mix of anger and anguish. "Why would you leave me like that?" Eliana looked down, her dark eyes clouded with sorrow. "I couldn't, Valen. The moment I gave birth to Luca, my blood was bound to him in ways you couldn't understand. You were king. You had enemies, powerful enemies. And they knew the truth. If they discovered who I was, who Luca was, they would have used him against you. They would have used me against you. I couldn't risk it." Valen felt a lump form in his throat. He had never imagined the depths of the struggles Eliana had faced. The life he had led, one of power, control, and unyielding ambition, had never once considered the sacrifices she had made, the price she had paid for their child's safety. "I thought I was protecting you both," Eliana continued softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I see now that I've only made things worse." Valen's gaze softened, and he reached out, his hand trembling slightly as it hovered near hers. "You should have told me. All these years, I've carried the weight of losing you and Luca. If I had known—" "You would have destroyed yourself, Valen," she interrupted, her voice shaking with emotion. "The truth was a dangerous thing for both of us. But now Luca is growing stronger, and the truth is coming to light." Valen's heart raced, realizing the implications of her words. Luca, his son, the heir to the throne, had a power far beyond his understanding, and now that power was awakening. "You said he recognized something in you," Valen said quietly, looking toward the castle, where Luca slept. "What did you mean by that?" Eliana paused, her eyes distant, as if contemplating a truth too painful to speak. "I believe Luca's power is tied to the bond we share. The bond that's been hidden from both of you for so long. I didn't come here just to care for him, Valen. I came to protect him. But that protection is becoming harder to maintain." Valen's mind spun, the weight of their shared history crashing over him. The truth had always been just out of reach, buried under layers of deception and sorrow. But now, with Eliana standing before him, the pieces were starting to fall into place. Luca was more than just his son. He was a key to something neither Valen nor Eliana had fully understood. The truth had been laid bare, and yet Valen found himself unable to fully grasp its weight. Eliana had been his mate Luca's mother, and he had been blind to the connection between them all these years. But even as the truth began to settle into his bones, the tension in the castle grew palpable. Luca's power was awakening, and there was an unsettling feeling in the air, as though something ancient and dark had been stirred. For the first time in weeks, Valen couldn't shake the feeling that danger was drawing near. It wasn't just the restless energy Luca seemed to emanate. It was something else, a shadow creeping closer with every passing day, its presence felt in the whispers of the wind and the howls of wolves in the distance. That night, as Valen walked the castle's corridors, he noticed it. A shadow, a figure cloaked in darkness, moving just beyond the light. It slipped through the halls like a wraith, its presence barely perceptible, yet unmistakable. Valen's instincts kicked in, his hand resting on the hilt of the sword at his side. He moved quickly, stepping into the darkness where the figure had disappeared. But when he reached the corner, there was nothing. The hall was empty, save for the cold stone walls and the flickering candlelight. His breath quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Eliana," Valen called, his voice low but urgent. She appeared moments later, as if summoned by his very thoughts. She was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. She had sensed it too. "There's something wrong," Eliana said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've felt it since I arrived. Luca's power is growing, but with it, something darker is also waking." Valen met her gaze, his stomach knotting. "What do you mean?" "There are forces at play that we can't control," Eliana replied, her tone grave. "Luca's bloodline is ancient, and it draws attention. There are enemies who know what he is, and they will come for him." A chill ran down Valen's spine. Luca, the child he had once believed to be nothing more than a son to him, was now a beacon of power, and that power had made him a target. "We need to prepare," Valen said, his voice hardening with resolve, "for Luca, and for the kingdom." The next few days felt like a tightening noose around Valen's neck. Eliana's warning had lit a fire of urgency in him. Luca's power was growing faster than any of them had anticipated, and the castle, once a sanctuary, now felt more like a fortress under siege. Valen had dispatched scouts to patrol the borders, but he knew that no number of soldiers would be enough to protect Luca from the darkness that was drawing near. The true battle would be fought within the walls of the castle itself. Valen found himself on edge, unable to shake the feeling that someone or something was watching them. Every passing shadow seemed to hold the promise of danger, and every gust of wind carried the scent of something foreign, something threatening. Eliana was at the heart of it all, guiding Luca through the changes that were taking place within him. The boy had become more withdrawn, more guarded, as his power surged. He would spend hours staring at the moon, his small form trembling with the force of something he couldn't control. Despite his anger and confusion, Luca had grown attached to Eliana in ways Valen had never imagined. The bond between them, forged through years of separation and loss, was undeniable. Luca no longer resisted her presence. In fact, he sought her out, clinging to her as though she were the only thing keeping him grounded. One evening, after a tense dinner in the grand hall, Valen found himself alone with Eliana in the castle's courtyard. The stars hung like diamonds above them, casting their soft light over the stone walls. The air was thick with tension, the silence between them stretching long. "He's changing," Valen said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Eliana nodded, her eyes clouded with both concern and something else. Regret, perhaps. "He's not the same boy you once knew. The power he's tapping into. It's not just his birthright. It's something more, something ancient." Valen frowned, his mind racing. "What do you mean?" Eliana hesitated before speaking, her gaze shifting toward the distant hills. "Luca's power isn't just a gift. It's a curse. And it's connected to something much darker. Something we've both been running from." The realization hit Valen like a thunderclap. The darkness was not just after Luca, it was bound to him, tied to his very existence. The revelation sent a tremor through Valen's chest, the weight of it pressing heavily on him. Eliana's words echoed in his mind. Luca's power isn't just a gift. It's a curse. It was a terrifying thought, one that he had never considered, but now that it was out in the open, it made a chilling kind of sense. The curse was not just about Luca's power, but about the legacy that came with it. Luca wasn't just the heir to Valen's throne. He was bound to something far older, something darker. The very blood that ran through Luca's veins was tainted by ancient forces, and those forces were stirring, calling out to him like a beacon in the night. As Valen stood beside Eliana in the courtyard, the wind picking up and rustling the leaves around them, a cold shiver ran down his spine. He could feel the pull of the darkness, a force that was pulling at his son, threatening to consume him. And worse, it seemed to be tied to Eliana, in a way that she wasn't ready to explain. "I should have told you sooner," Eliana said, her voice tight with emotion. "But I feared the truth would destroy everything. I didn't want you to know what Luca was truly meant to be." Valen stepped closer to her, his heart pounding. "What do you mean? What is he meant to be?" Eliana's eyes flickered to the moon above them, the silver light casting a shadow over her face. "Luca's bloodline is ancient, far older than mine, than yours. He's not just a werewolf. He's part of something much larger, a force that could either save or destroy the kingdom." Valen's pulse quickened. He could barely understand the words, but he could feel the truth in them, deep within his bones. Luca wasn't just a child with power, he was a key, a vessel for something that could reshape the entire world. And the darker forces that had been lurking in the shadows all this time had finally begun to stir. "We don't have much time," Eliana said urgently, her voice filled with an edge of fear. "The darkness is coming for him, Valen. It's coming for all of us." Valen nodded, his mind already racing through the possible threats. He had no choice now. He had to protect Luca and Eliana, no matter the cost. But as the wind howled through the trees, he knew that whatever was coming, it would be a fight like no other. The days that followed were filled with an intensity that Valen had never experienced. The castle was on high alert, the tension palpable as the night approached. Valen knew the storm was coming. The darkness Eliana had warned him about was no longer a distant threat. It was right at their doorstep, clawing its way closer with every passing hour. Luca had grown restless. He could feel it too. The boy, once filled with wild rage, now seemed to be consumed by a deeper turmoil, a darkness within him that he couldn't escape. He would stand by the castle's highest tower, staring out at the horizon as if waiting for something, someone. His connection to Eliana had only deepened. She was his anchor, his tether to a world that seemed increasingly out of his control. But even she couldn't shield him from what was coming. Valen stood at the edge of the courtyard, The night sky stretched before him like a blanket of dark possibility. Eliana joined him, her presence a comfort despite the danger that surrounded them. "We can't hide from this," Valen said, his voice tight with determination. "I have to face what's coming for Luca. I owe it to him." Eliana's eyes met his, filled with a sorrow that mirrored his own. "You're not just facing it for Luca, Valen. You're facing it for all of us. For the kingdom. This curse, it doesn't just affect him. It's tied to everything." The weight of her words hung between them. The kingdom, his legacy, the pack, all of it was on the line. Luca's power had awakened, but so too had the ancient forces that sought to control it. "I should have never left," Eliana whispered, regret heavy in her tone. "If I had stayed, perhaps we could have fought this together from the beginning. But I was afraid. I thought I was protecting you both by staying away." Valen turned to her, his eyes hard but filled with understanding. "You did what you had to do, but now, we fight together. No more running." The ground beneath their feet trembled, and a deep, guttural growl echoed from the forest. Valen's heart skipped. It was time. The darkness had arrived. They rushed to the castle's center, where Luca stood alone, his small body trembling, his eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. His power was beyond anything Valen had ever imagined. The boy was no longer just the child of the Alpha King, he was something more, something ancient. And as Valen approached, Luca turned to him, his gaze piercing. "Dad," Luca said, his voice small but strong. "I don't want this. I don't want to hurt anyone." Eliana knelt beside him, her hands resting gently on his shoulders. "You won't hurt anyone, Luca. You are not the curse. You are the one who can break it." Valen watched them, his heart torn. Luca was his son, but the forces inside him were wild, untamable. He was both the key and the lock to everything. The future of their world rested on his shoulders. The shadows around them grew darker, swirling like a storm. A deep, foreboding presence filled the air, and Valen knew the time had come for a choice, one that would either destroy everything or rebuild it. "Luca," Valen said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You are the future of this kingdom, but you must choose control your power, or let it control you." Luca's eyes flickered between Valen and Eliana. His small hand trembled, and the force of the power inside him seemed to surge and pull at the very fabric of the world around them. "I choose you," Luca whispered, his voice filled with an unspoken promise. In that moment, a light, bright and pure, began to emanate from Luca, pushing back the shadows. The ancient forces that had once threatened to claim him began to dissipate, as though they were no match for the strength of the bond between mother, father, and son. Valen's heart swelled with pride as he watched his son, his true heir, harness the power that had once seemed like a curse. It was a choice, a decision made from love, not fear. The darkness was defeated, not by strength alone, but by the unity of their bond, the love that had been buried for so long, now shining brighter than ever before. Valen looked at Eliana, a new understanding in his eyes. The battle had been won, but the future was theirs to shape. Together, and for the first time in years, Valen truly believed that the kingdom and their family was whole.